Imagine being one of the most famous faces on the planet, the highest paid actor on television, adored by millions every single week, and still ending up broke, blackmailed, and diagnosed with a disease that once carried a death sentence. That is not a plot from one of his movies. That is the real life of Charlie Sheen. At 60 years old, when most people are winding down and enjoying the fruits of a long career, Sheen is instead looking back at a story so extreme that even Hollywood couldn't have scripted it better. He was once the highest paid man on television, a household name whose face was inescapable, and someone who seemed to have everything money and fame could possibly buy. And yet, piece by piece, almost all of it slipped away. So how did a kid from a respected acting family end up living through addiction, arrests, public feuds, financial collapse, and one of the most public meltdowns in celebrity history? Was it inevitable, or could things have gone differently at any point along the way? To really understand it, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Charlie Sheen was born Carlos Erwin Estevez on September 3, 1965, in New York City. He was the youngest son of actor Martin Sheen and artist Janet Templeton. His father was still building his own career at the time, working steadily but without the fame he would later achieve. When the family moved to Malibu, California, young Charlie grew up surrounded by creativity and ambition. He spent his childhood making home movies with his older brother Emilio Estevez and a group of neighborhood friends who would also go on to become major stars, including Rob Lowe and Sean Penn. Long before any of them were famous, they were just teenagers experimenting with cameras and homemade scripts, having no idea what was waiting for them. Unlike many of his peers, Charlie didn't wait around for a traditional path into the industry. He left high school before graduating to focus entirely on acting, and at some point he made the decision to go by Sheen instead of Estevez, adopting the stage name his father had used years earlier. It was a small choice with big consequences, because it meant his own identity as an actor would be built from the very beginning under that name, separate from his father's legacy but tied to it all the same. His big break came remarkably early. At just 20 years old, Charlie was cast as Chris Taylor in Oliver Stone's Vietnam War film Platoon, shot under brutal conditions in the Philippines. Stone reportedly put his cast through intense physical training to help them understand what soldiers in the field actually endured, and that intensity showed up on screen. When Platoon won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1987, Charlie Sheen was suddenly attached to one of the most respected war films ever made. His career took off almost immediately after that. Later that same year, he starred alongside Michael Douglas in Wall Street, playing an ambitious young stockbroker pulled into a world of greed and corruption. The film became a defining piece of 1980s culture, and looking back, it's hard not to notice how closely his character's downfall would eventually echo parts of his own life. Through the rest of the decade, Sheen built a reputation as one of the most bankable young actors in Hollywood, appearing in hit after hit, including Young Guns, Major League, and the action comedy spoof Hot Shots. He had range, he had charisma, and he had the kind of screen presence that studios were eager to build entire projects around. To audiences watching from the outside, it looked like the beginning of a career that could go absolutely anywhere. But even while his career was climbing, there were already signs that his personal life was heading somewhere far more difficult, quiet warning signs that wouldn't fully reveal themselves for years. Everything changed again in 2003, when Sheen took on the role of Charlie Harper in the CBS sitcom 2.5 Men. The show followed two brothers sharing a beach house, with Sheen playing a wealthy, irresponsible bachelor who avoided commitment and lived for pleasure. Audiences loved it, partly because the character felt uncomfortably close to the actor playing him. Within a few seasons, 2.5 Men had become one of the most watched comedies on American television, and Sheen, alongside co-stars Jon Cryer and Angus T. Jones, helped turn it into a genuine cultural phenomenon. That success translated into extraordinary money. By the later seasons, Sheen was reportedly earning around $1.8 million per episode, making him one of the highest-paid actors in the history of television. The show's popularity and his own public image began to blend together so much that fans sometimes struggled to tell where Charlie Harper ended and Charlie Sheen began. But behind the massive ratings and the massive paychecks, trouble had been building for years. Back in 1990, Sheen accidentally shot his then-fiancée, actress Kelly Preston, in the arm during an incident at his home. No charges were filed, and Preston described it as an accident, but it was one of the first times the public began associating his name with chaos rather than talent. Reports of heavy drinking and drug use followed throughout the 1990s, along with early stays in rehabilitation programs. In 1995, Sheen testified as part of the criminal investigation into Hollywood Madam Heidi Fleisch, admitting under oath that he had spent tens of thousands of dollars on escorts. A year later, he pleaded no contest to misdemeanor battery after an incident involving his then-girlfriend, Brittany Ashland, who later filed a civil suit against him. These weren't isolated headlines. They were part of a pattern that would repeat itself again and again over the following decades, even as his career continued to thrive. Success on that scale brought staggering wealth, and Hollywood had rarely seen anything quite like it before. Network executives considered him irreplaceable. The show generated enormous syndication revenue on top of his salary, and for years, almost everyone involved had a financial reason to keep the machine running exactly as it was. Some critics later pointed out the strange irony in all of this. The very qualities that made Charlie Harper so entertaining, his drinking, his womanizing, his refusal to grow up, were the same qualities Sheen was struggling with in real life, and the show's massive popularity essentially rewarded the blurring of that line rather than discouraging it. His personal life during this period was just as turbulent as his professional one. He married actress Denise Richards in 2002, and the couple had 2 daughters before divorcing a few years later amid allegations involving substance abuse. In 2008, he married Brooke Mueller, with whom he had twin sons, but that marriage also fell apart under difficult circumstances, including a 2009 arrest in Aspen, Colorado after an altercation with Mueller that led to a guilty plea for misdemeanor assault. In 2010, police were called to New York's Plaza Hotel after Sheen caused significant damage to his hotel suite during what was described as a drug and alcohol-fueled episode. Despite all of this, he kept showing up to work on 2.5 Men, and the show kept succeeding. 4 years, that contradiction defined him. A man whose personal life seemed to be falling apart, who somehow still delivered reliable, well-regarded performances week after week. That balancing act finally collapsed in early 2011. After Sheen entered another round of rehab, production on 2.5 Men was suspended. But instead of quietly stepping back, Sheen went in the opposite direction entirely. He gave a series of increasingly wild interviews, describing himself with phrases like Adonis DNA and Tiger Blood, and the word winning became an instant, inescapable piece of pop culture. It was strange and captivating, and for a while, it felt like the entire country couldn't stop watching. But underneath the spectacle, the situation was serious. CBS canceled the remainder of the season, and Sheen's relationship with the show's creator, Chuck Lorre, deteriorated into open hostility, with Sheen attacking him repeatedly in the press. On March 7, 2011, Warner Brothers officially terminated his contract, citing his conduct. Sheen responded with a $100 million lawsuit against the studio, which was eventually settled confidentially later that year. 2.5 Men continued without him, bringing in Ashton Kutcher, and ran for 4 more seasons before ending in 2015. Meanwhile, Sheen tried to capitalize on his newfound infamy with a live tour, but early shows were reportedly met with booing and audience walkouts, forcing changes to the format. What almost nobody knew during that entire chaotic stretch was that Sheen was carrying a secret far more serious than any tabloid headline. Around 2011, he was diagnosed as HIV positive. For roughly 4 years, he kept that diagnosis hidden from the public, sharing it only with a small circle of people he trusted. He later described the diagnosis as one of the most devastating moments of his life, recalling headaches and night sweats that led him to fear he had a brain tumor before doctors delivered the actual news. His physician, Dr. Robert Huizinga, later clarified that Sheen did not have AIDS, and that with proper treatment his long-term outlook was good. Still, keeping that secret came at an enormous cost. On November 17, 2015, Sheen sat down with Matt Lauer on NBC's Today Show and said the words that changed everything. He was, in fact, HIV positive. He explained that he had decided to go public because he was being blackmailed, telling Lauer he had paid out upwards of $10 million over the years to people threatening to expose his condition, including one incident where someone allegedly photographed his medication and threatened to sell the picture. "What people forget is that's money they're taking from my children," he said during the interview. Researchers later found that public searches for HIV testing and prevention information rose noticeably in the days following his announcement, a phenomenon that came to be referred to informally as the Charlie Sheen effect. At the same time, the disclosure led to a wave of lawsuits from former partners who alleged he hadn't told them about his status beforehand. Sheen denied knowingly exposing anyone to the virus, and several of the resulting disputes were eventually settled privately, without any admission of wrongdoing. After the disclosure, many expected some kind of dramatic comeback, the kind of redemption arc Hollywood loves to tell. What actually followed was more complicated. In 2012, even before his HIV announcement, Sheen had already returned to television in the FX comedy Anger Management, playing a former baseball player turned therapist working through his own issues while helping others manage theirs, a premise that once again put his real-life reputation directly in conversation with the character he was playing. The show performed well enough in its early episodes to trigger an unusual network deal. If the first batch of episodes hit certain ratings targets, FX would immediately order enough additional episodes to guarantee a full 100-episode run suitable for syndication. Those targets were met, and Anger Management became one of the fastest sitcoms in television history to reach that milestone. On paper, it looked like a genuine comeback. In practice, ratings steadily declined after the premiere, reviews were mixed, and much of the audience interest seemed to center on curiosity about Sheen himself rather than the show's storylines. It never came close to matching the massive cultural footprint of 2.5 Men. Along the way, there was more controversy. Co-star Selma Blair, who played his character's colleague and love interest for the first 2 seasons, left the show in 2013 amid reports of on-set conflict, with some accounts suggesting Sheen wanted her removed after she raised concerns about his behavior. Sheen later offered a different explanation on The Tonight Show, saying her character had simply run its course creatively. Whatever the full story was, the show wrapped up in December 2014, and the flood of major offers that once defined his career never really returned in the same way. Financially, the fallout from years of legal battles, divorces, and lavish spending steadily chipped away at a fortune that once seemed limitless. At his peak on 2.5 Men, he had been earning roughly $1.8 million per episode, translating into hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of his career. But expensive settlements, mounting legal fees, child support obligations, and years of extravagant spending eroded that fortune far faster than anyone might have expected. Court records showed his income dropping significantly compared to his television peak, and he sought reductions in his child support payments while selling off high-value properties, including homes in Beverly Hills that had once symbolized just how far he had come. The image of Charlie Sheen as untouchable Hollywood royalty had been replaced by something far more human and far more complicated, a man dealing with the ordinary financial consequences of an extraordinary, chaotic life. Today, as he has turned 60, Sheen tells a different story about himself. He says he has remained sober since December 2017 and that consistent antiretroviral treatment has kept his HIV under control, allowing him to live without it defining his daily life. That perspective shaped both his memoir and a documentary revisiting his career, his struggles, and the choices that led him there. Reactions to that project have been mixed, with some praising his honesty and others feeling it didn't fully reckon with the impact of his behavior on the people around him. Some relationships from his past, including with former castmate John Cryer, remain distant. Charlie Sheen's story isn't a simple tale of talent wasted or fame corrupting a good person. It's messier than that. He had a level of success that most actors never come close to, and he lost an enormous amount of it, not all at once, but slowly, through years of choices, secrets, and consequences that eventually caught up with him. What makes his story so unusual isn't just the scale of the highs and the lows, it's how long he managed to keep both running in parallel, delivering hit performances on set while his personal life unraveled almost in plain sight. For years, Hollywood kept betting that the talent would outlast the turmoil, and for a while, it did. But no career, no matter how successful, can absorb that kind of pressure indefinitely. Whether you see him as a cautionary tale, a survivor, or somewhere in between, his life remains one of the most extraordinary rise and fall stories modern Hollywood has ever produced. Few actors have experienced highs as dramatic as an Academy Award-winning film and the biggest paycheck in television history, only to also experience lows involving blackmail, addiction, and a life-altering diagnosis, all within the same lifetime. At 60, he's still here, still talking about it, still working occasionally, and still, in his own words, just trying to live for the next moment rather than looking too far ahead. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.